The world ends not with a bang, but with a slide rule's precise scratch on paper. Leo Stern hears that sound, amplified 1,000 times in his skull. It is the sound of his own conscience being divided. Chicago, November 1944. The metallurgical laboratory at the University of Chicago is a cathedral of quiet panic. Behind its unmarked doors, men calculate the end of war and the beginning of something else. Leo, 23, moves through the sterile corridors like a ghost. His hands perform the tasks, calibrating instruments, checking purity coefficients for uranium samples, but his mind is elsewhere. It is in the photographs from Majdanek concentration camp, published in a newspaper he hid beneath his mattress. It is in the voice of General Groves on a recent visit, speaking of the project not as a weapon to end a war, but as the ultimate guarantee of American peace. The word guarantee tastes like iron. His breaking point is not ideological, but visceral. It happens in a secure briefing room. A senior physicist, flushed with a minor triumph, shows a simplified diagram of the implosion compression concept for the plutonium device. He calls it the gadget. He speaks of yields in kilotons, as if discussing crop tonnage. And then he jokes, a dry technical joke about the Pax Americana they are forging in their reactors. A few men chuckle. Leo feels the coffee rise in his throat. He sees not a deterrent, but a single monstrous gun pointed at the head of the future. The silence after the laugh is the loudest sound he has ever heard. 3 days later, in a public library under the pretense of researching thermal diffusion, he feels a presence. A man sits opposite him, medium in every way. Build, coat, forgettable face. The man slides a book across the table. It is a volume of Heisenberg's early physics papers. A slip of paper protrudes like a bookmark. On it, in neat block letters, "The balance of terror is still terror. We can stop the next war before it begins." Beneath, an address and a time. Tonight. Leo's heart becomes a frantic drum against his ribs. This is not an offer. It is a diagnosis. They have seen his sickness, his fear. He sits paralyzed for an hour after the man leaves. The slip of paper in his pocket feels radioactive. He considers burning it. He considers turning it in. But the image that stops him is not of Stalin or the Red Army. It is of Groves' smug smile, and behind it, a future where every diplomatic crisis is solved by the implicit, unanswerable question, "Do you want to see our son?" He goes. The address is a closed watch repair shop in a modest neighborhood. The man from the library, he thinks of him as the architect, lets him in without a word. The room is a workshop, cluttered with disemboweled clocks. Tick-tock sounds come from 100 sources, a chaotic symphony of passing time. There is no recruitment speech, no talk of communism. The architect speaks in the language of physics and consequence. He lays out a stark equation. German science is shattered. Only America possesses the resources to complete the atomic project. A monopoly of such power is inherently unstable. History shows monopolies lead to empire, then to tyranny. The only way to prevent a new, unimaginable tyranny is to ensure a balance. A second sun, rising in the east to keep the western one in check. Information is not treason, he says, his voice as calm as a professor's. It is a vaccine, a necessary ugly antibody injected into the body of global politics to prevent a fatal disease. Leo argues weakly. He mentions security, loyalty oaths. The architect opens a small folder. Not photos of Leo's family in Europe, that would be too crude. Instead, it is a list, Names of European scientists, some Jewish, some anti-fascist, who were smuggled out through channels friendly to Moscow. People saved. Then, a second list. Names of those who were refused visas by the State Department, who later vanished into the Nazi machine. The message is clear. Your government picks and chooses who lives and who dies based on politics. We are offering you a choice on a planetary scale. The technical briefing is chilling in its clarity. The architect explains the cell system. Leo will be a singleton. His contact, a woman codenamed Aurora, will find him. He will never seek her. Dead drops. A chalk mark on a specific park bench to signal a pickup. A lost glove containing a microfilm capsule. The romance of spy novels is stripped away, replaced by a cold operational manual for betrayal. Leo is given his first task, a memory test. He is to walk through his section of the MetLab tomorrow and mentally map not the science, but the security. Guard post locations, the type of locks on the document vaults, the schedule of the patrols, the architecture of trust seen through the eyes of a saboteur. He leaves the shop into a rain-slicked night. The city sounds are different. The clang of a streetcar is an alarm. The headlights of a passing car feel like a searchlight sweeping over him. He is now a secret. A walking, breathing, compartmentalized secret. He does not go home. He walks to Lincoln Park, to the designated bench near the old conservatory. His hand, buried in his pocket, clutches a piece of white chalk. The park is deserted, the wind cutting through the bare branches. This is the moment. The point of no return is not a dramatic leap, but the application of pressure to a small white cylinder. He makes the mark. 3 short lines like an equal sign. It looks like vandalism, nothing more. But in the language of his new world it screams, "I am here, I agree, I am yours." As he turns to leave, a flashlight beam cuts across the path 30 yards away. A park watchman making his rounds. The beam sweeps toward the bench, toward the fresh white mark. Leo freezes, melted into the shadow of an oak tree. The beam pauses on the graffiti. The watchman grunts, annoyed, and moves on, his footsteps fading. Leo sags against the rough bark, his breath steaming in the cold air. The fear is no longer abstract. It is metallic and sharp in his mouth. It has a taste. It is the taste of the chalk and the iron of his own blood where he has bitten his lip. He has taken the first step into the labyrinth, and the door behind him has just, silently, ceased to exist. The clock in his mind, synchronized with 100 others in a dark room, begins its countdown. The summons to Los Alamos arrived not as a reward, but as a verdict. A sealed envelope, hand-delivered by a military courier, with eyes that held no curiosity. Leo's security clearance had been elevated to Special Engineer. The order was phrased as a request, but its nature was absolute. He was to be on the train to Lamy, New Mexico, within 72 hours. The machinery of the project had identified a useful cog and was slotting it into its most critical assembly. For Leo, it felt less like a promotion and more like being swallowed whole. The journey was a descent into another America. The plains gave way to desolate sun-bleached mesas. The train car, filled with other quiet men and a few tense women, hummed with a suppressed energy. No one spoke of their work. They spoke of the weather, of baseball scores from weeks ago, a shared performance of normalcy that was more unnerving than silence. Leo watched the landscape, a geological chaos of red rock and deep shadows, and felt it was a fitting setting for the birth of a primordial force. Los Alamos was not a town. It was an armed camp perched on a mesa top, a crude sketch of civilization etched onto the wilderness. Barbed wire fences cut across the breathtaking vistas. Military police and jeeps prowled the dirt streets. The houses were identical, hastily erected boxes. The air was thin, cold, and carried the constant scent of ponderosa pine and dust. It was a cage with a view of the end of the world. His role here was more specific, more chilling. Assigned to the Critical Assemblies Group under Fermi, his work involved calculations for the plutonium core's behavior. He dealt with numbers that described neutron multiplication, with probabilities of premature detonation. He was no longer on the periphery. He was touching the beating heart of the gadget. Every equation he solved was a stitch in the bomb's skin. The moral vertigo he felt in Chicago was now a constant physical sensation, like the high-altitude dizziness that plagued new arrivals. He saw the giants, Oppie with his gaunt intensity, Teller's brooding presence, Fermi's practical genius, but they were distant stars in a firmament of frantic activity. His world was the clatter of marchant calculators, the endless reams of green-bar paper, the low murmur of arguments in technical jargon that masked profound ethical terror. The pressure was a tangible force, warping time, shortening tempers. He shared a drafty cabin with two other junior scientists, men who talked in their sleep about diffusion coefficients and boundary conditions. The signal from his handlers came 3 weeks in. A mistake in the weekly laundry delivery. A shirt he never owned, starched and folded among his own. Pinned inside the collar, a single strand of long, dark hair. And a time. Tomorrow. Sunset. The trail to the canyon rim. He spent the day in a state of exquisite agony. Every glance from a colleague felt like an accusation. A casual question from a security officer about his settling-in process made his palms slick with sweat. He moved through his calculations, the numbers blurring before his eyes, his mind a roaring static of fear and a grim, determined clarity. This was why he was here. This was the price of the balance. The path was steep, rocky, lined with juniper. The setting sun bled across the vast desert sky, painting the clouds in violent shades of orange and purple. It was a sight of sublime beauty that felt like a mockery. He reached the overlook, a flat stone jutting over the abyss. The wind here was a constant, whispering force. She emerged from the shadows of a copse of pines, as if materializing from the twilight itself. Aurora. She was younger than he expected, perhaps 30, with a calm, observant face that held no warmth. She wore the practical clothes of a project secretary, or a librarian, which he later learned she was. Her name was Elizabeth, and she worked in the technical documents office, processing the very papers he helped generate. Her eyes were the most striking feature, a pale, cool gray that assessed him without a flicker of ideology or empathy. She was a technician, like him. Her medium was secrets. No words were exchanged. He had memorized his first report, the layout of his technical building, the checkpoints, the location of the new, secure vault for implosion lens designs. He handed her a seemingly innocent item, a battered copy of the pocketbook of verse, its pages hollowed out to hold 2 rolls of 35mm film. Inside were not just his written observations, but photographs he had risked everything to take. Blueprint fragments left unattended during a night shift. A chalkboard covered in equations relating to the polonium-beryllium initiator, not yet erased. Her hands, steady and efficient, took the book and placed it inside her plain canvas satchel. In return, She gave him a new item, a stainless steel pen. "A gift from your uncle," she said, her voice low and devoid of inflection. The pen, when unscrewed, had a hollow compartment. Future instructions would be hidden there, microdot messages affixed to the spring. This was their channel. The entire transaction took less than 90 seconds. As she turned to melt back into the pines, she paused. For the first time, her professional mask slipped just a fraction. She looked not at him, but at the apocalyptic sunset. "It's quite a thing they're building down there," she said. Not a question, but a statement of shared, awful burden. Then she was gone, the rustle of her footsteps swallowed by the wind. Leo stood alone on the precipice, the pen heavy in his pocket. The moment of connection, of shared purpose, was instantly replaced by a deeper, more profound isolation. He was truly alone now. He had passed the point of theory and entered the realm of action. On his walk back to the tech area, the sky now a deep indigo, he passed the main administrative building. A commotion. 2 men in civilian suits, their posture screaming federal agent, were escorting a sobbing technician from the metallurgy lab. The man's face was ashen, his voice a desperate, repeating whimper. "I just misplaced it. It was a mistake, I swear to God, it was a mistake." One of the MPs glanced at Leo as he passed, his eyes scanning, cataloging. The look lasted only a second, but it froze the blood in Leo's veins. It was a look that saw not a scientist, but a potential flaw in the system, a piece that might need to be removed. He continued walking, his legs moving on autopilot, his heart a trapped bird slamming against his ribs. The man's pleading echoed in his head. A mistake. Leo clutched the pen in his pocket so tightly he feared the metal would bend. His act was not a mistake. It was a deliberate, calculated fracture. And as he saw the van drive away with the terrified technician, the consequence of discovery ceased to be an abstract concept. It had a face, a voice, a sound of pure animal fear. The maze now had walls, and they were closing in. The shadow he had chosen to enter had just grown deeper and far more real. While Leo navigated the paranoid isolation of the mesa, a parallel, invisible machine hummed with meticulous efficiency 3,000 miles away. This was not the world of science, but the realm of tradecraft, a world of shadows, dead letters, and absolute silence. Its nerve center was not a grand office, but a modest, unremarkable room in a residential building in New York's Greenwich Village. The room smelled of dust, developing chemicals, and endless cigarettes. Here, the architect, known in cables to Moscow Center only as Vladimir, presided over the most critical scientific intelligence operation in history. The room was a physical manifestation of the network's mind. One wall was a detailed map of the United States, threaded with red pins and taut strings connecting cities: New York, Washington, Chicago, Santa Fe, Albuquerque, San Francisco. Each pin was not a person, but a function, a pulse in the system. Another wall held shelves of seemingly innocuous books, tomes on agriculture, vintage poetry collections, electrical engineering manuals. Each was a masterpiece of clandestine art, their spines carefully cut and hollowed, their pages trimmed to create secret cavities for microfilm. A small dark room, vented through a cleverly disguised chimney flue, occupied a closet. Here, vital documents were reduced to specks of information smaller than a fly's eye. Vladimir was the conductor. His face, still bland and forgettable, was now etched with the fatigue of perpetual vigilance. He moved between a shortwave radio, its bursts of encrypted noise sounding like angry insects, and a powerful microscope, under which a world of stolen secrets blossomed. Today, he was processing Mládnec's first major delivery. The film rolls from the poetry book, developed and magnified, revealed their treasures. Vladimir, himself an engineer by training, felt a cold thrill that had nothing to do with ideology. He was looking at the inner skeleton of the American superweapon. Schematics of lens molds, calculations for the shockwave convergence, data on the polonium initiator. It was not yet the complete blueprint, but it was the architectural plan. He understood the physics enough to feel the magnitude of the horror and the triumph. His agents were not swashbuckling heroes. They were gears. There was the tailor, a mild-mannered man who ran a dry-cleaning service near the Soviet consulate. His delivery vans made predictable routes, their bundles of clothes perfect for passing unremarkable packages. There was the sound, a radio operator with the nerves of a surgeon and the patience of a stone, who transmitted compressed bursts of data in pre-dawn windows, his signal hidden in the storm of commercial radio traffic. There was the cleaner, a woman who worked as a maid in a diplomatic residence, whose role was to sanitize dead drop locations, removing any trace of contact. They never knew each other's names, only their call signs and their windows of operation. They were a circuit board of human components, designed for one purpose: to move information from the heart of the American desert to the desks of Lavrenti Beria in Moscow. The process was a ballet of risk and precision. A courier, a different one each time, would arrive in Santa Fe posing as a tourist or a salesman. Elizabeth would make the pass in a crowded market or a quiet church. A shopping bag exchanged, a newspaper left on a bench. The courier would then travel, often by complex, looping routes, to New York. The material would reach the tailor. From there, it would enter the diplomatic pouch, enjoying the protection of international treaty, or be passed to the sound for immediate transmission. Each handover was a potential point of catastrophic failure. Each person in the chain held the power to destroy them all. Vladimir drafted the cable to Moscow Center. His language was dry, technical, devoid of celebration. Mládnec's material received, quality excellent, confirms implosion design viability, initiator specifications partial, but highly significant. Awaiting further. But after encoding the message, he allowed himself a moment. He poured 2 fingers of cheap whiskey into a glass and stared at a photograph on his desk. Not of Stalin, but of the smoldering ruins of Stalingrad. His brother's regiment had vanished there. For him, Mládnec was not just a source. He was a form of remote, delayed vengeance. Every equation stolen was a bullet fired back across the Atlantic, not at American boys, but at the future American diktat. He was ensuring the Red Army would never again face a technological surprise of such magnitude. But the machinery was not infallible. Paranoia was its essential lubricant. A week after receiving Leo's film, a signal from a lower priority source in Buffalo went silent. Not just silent. The prearranged, all-clear mark at a bus stop was not made. It could mean nothing. Illness, cold feet, a family emergency. In their world, it meant everything. It meant compromise. Vladimir immediately enacted contingency protocols. The entire Buffalo subnet was ordered to freeze. A courier route through Cleveland was abandoned. The rhythm of life in the Greenwich Village room changed. The radio schedule was scrambled. The darkroom went dark for 48 hours. This tremor in the network had a direct, immediate consequence for Leo. a planned package of new questions and requests from Moscow's scientists meant to guide his future efforts, was aborted mid-transit. The elegant, silent machine had stuttered. For the first time, Leo would experience not just the fear of his own capture, but the chilling reality of being cut adrift by his handlers. He was a vital organ in a body that might, for its own survival, decide to amputate him. Back in New York, Vladimir reviewed the security protocols for Mladinets. The young physicist was now their single most valuable asset. He was also their single greatest vulnerability. The system had to protect him, even from itself. The order was encoded and sent. Aurora is to minimize direct contact. Dead. Drops only. No visual confirmation unless extreme emergency. Mladinets is to be preserved at all costs. The machinery was prioritizing its most critical component. It was a decision based on cold logic, one that would deepen Leo's isolation on the mesa, turning him from a soldier in a secret army into a monument, waiting alone in the desert for instructions that might never come again. The ghost in the machine had felt a draft, and it had drawn back, leaving its most important creation to shiver in the void. Winter clamped down on the mesa like a vice of cold iron. The pine trees stood black against a relentless gray sky, and the wind howled through the canyon with a voice that spoke of oblivion. Inside the tech area, however, the climate was one of feverish, sweat-soaked heat. The gadget was transitioning from theory to physical reality. And with it, the ambient anxiety among the scientists crystallized into a sharp, focused dread. They were no longer building an idea. They were assembling a god, and they were all terrified of what it would demand in sacrifice. For Leo, the isolation imposed by his handler's security freeze was a unique form of torture. The pen in his pocket remained hollow, a silent metallic taunt. Had he been abandoned? Discovered? Was the entire apparatus that had given meaning to his treason now just a ghost story? He moved through his work on autopilot, his mind a prisoner of its own secrets. He calculated blast yields and neutron cross-sections, each number feeling like a brick in a wall separating him from the rest of humanity. The camaraderie of shared purpose that permeated the labs was a banquet from which he was forever excluded, watching through a pane of glass. His only tether to something resembling normalcy was Anna. She was a mathematician from Berkeley, assigned to the computational division. Her mind, a swift, graceful instrument for solving hydrodynamic equations for the implosion. They met in the library, a fortress of silence amidst the chaos, both seeking refuge from the noise. She had a quiet intensity, a sadness in her eyes that mirrored his own, though its source was different. She spoke of the beauty of pure mathematics, corrupted by the exigencies of war, of the haunting feeling that they were all writing a new, demonic chapter in the book of physics. With her, he could drop the pretense of patriotic zeal. They shared a language of moral disquiet, a profound sorrow for the world they were helping to unmoor. In her presence, the monstrous weight on his soul felt momentarily shared, diluted. He began to see in her not just an ally, but a possible future, a life after the mesa, a redemption he knew he could never truly earn. And then, the thaw. The signal came not through the pen, but through an act of mundane sabotage. The water heater in his shared cabin failed, flooding the small bathroom. While the military housing officer grumbled about shoddy plumbing, Leo found it. A small, wax-sealed aluminum tube, shoved deep into the inlet pipe, placed there by a hand he would never know. Inside, a microdot. The instructions were concise, brutal, and of monumental significance. Moscow's physicists, analyzing his earlier data, had hit a wall. The implosion design was elegant, but the symmetry of the explosive shockwave was a theoretical phantom. They needed the exact specifications of the high explosive lenses, the intricate multi-shaped charges that would wrap the plutonium core and crush it with perfect uniformity. The American solution to this problem had a code name: chrysanthemum. This was the heart of the plutonium bomb. Without it, the Soviet device was a blind, stumbling giant. The order was a quantum leap in risk. This was not mapping guard posts. This was stealing the finished, engineered blueprint of the bomb's most complex non-nuclear component. The data was held in a vault within the X Division, a zone of even higher security, accessible only to a handful of senior engineers and their trusted assistants. Leo was not one of them. He spent 3 days in a state of near paralysis, the microdot burning a hole in his consciousness. He watched Anna across the cafeteria, her laugh at some joke a painful reminder of the innocence he was about to incinerate. The balance of terror he believed in now demanded a personal terror so profound it threatened to unmake him. His opportunity came from chaos. A major test of explosive formulations was scheduled at Anchor Ranch, a remote canyon site. For 72 hours, the senior X Division staff would be consumed by the fiery diagnostics. Security would be intense, but focused outward on the perimeter. The vault, while still guarded, would be accessed less frequently. Leo's plan was not born of spycraft genius, but of desperate observation. He had noted that the vault's second guard, a corporal named O'Malley, suffered from migraines. Leo, known as a harmless brainiac, had once offered him aspirin from his own kit. A connection, however faint. On the night of the test, with the distant, muffled thump of high explosives echoing through the mountains like a sickened heartbeat, Leo enacted his plan. He reported a malfunction in a calculating machine in an office adjacent to the vault corridor, a plausible technical emergency. He carried his toolbox. He found O'Malley at his post, pale and sweating, fingers pressed to his temple. The other guard was making a perimeter round. Leo offered sympathy and stronger painkillers from his kit. He lingered, talking in a low, calming voice about the pressure they were all under, sharing a cigarette. It was a performance of human concern that felt like the deepest sin of all. When O'Malley stepped into a nearby lavatory for a moment of relief, Leo was alone at the vault door for 90 seconds. He didn't open it. That was impossible. Instead, he worked on the ventilation grate, high on the wall of the corridor, a task he had ostensibly come to fix. From his toolbox, he retrieved a modified periscope device, a simple series of mirrors he had crafted in the metal shop. He slid it silently through the slats of the grate, which offered a narrow sightline into the vault's interior. On a desk inside, left in the rush to the test site, was a folder. Stamped on its cover was the designation X2 Lens Assembly Chrysanthemum Final. His hands, steady as a surgeon's, manipulated the device. A tiny camera, adapted from a child's toy, was affixed to the eyepiece. He pressed the shutter release. A soft, almost inaudible click. He took 3 photographs, shifting the angle slightly each time. Then the apparatus was retracted. The grate, silently resecured. He was back at his toolbox when O'Malley returned, looking marginally better. Leo gave him a weary smile, a shared look of men enduring the same strange hell, and left. The film cartridge in his pocket felt like a live coal. He made the drop that same night, in the dead of winter, the microfilm capsule hidden inside a frozen carcass of a rabbit left by the fence line. A morbid signal Elizabeth would recognize. He returned to his cabin, his body shaking not from the cold, but from a systemic shock. He had done it. He had stolen the soul of the weapon. That night he dreamed not of discovery or prison, but of the chrysanthemum. In the dream it was not an explosive lens, but a beautiful, intricate flower made of frozen light. He reached for it, and as his fingers touched the petals, they dissolved into a silent, expanding fire that consumed the sky. He woke with a gasp, Anna's name on his lips, a confession, and a plea choked back into the suffocating darkness. The deed was done. The balance was being forged. And Leo Stern, standing at the center of the maelstrom, had never felt more profoundly, irredeemably alone. The weight of the chrysanthemum was now his to carry, forever. Winter clamped down on the mesa like a vice of cold iron. The pine trees stood black against a relentless gray sky, and the wind howled through the canyon with a voice that spoke of oblivion. Inside the tech area, however, the climate was one of feverish, sweat-soaked heat. The gadget was transitioning from theory to physical reality, and with it, the ambient anxiety among the scientists crystallized into a sharp, focused dread. They were no longer building an idea. They were assembling a god, and they were all terrified of what it would demand in sacrifice. For Leo, the isolation imposed by his handler's security freeze was a unique form of torture. The pen in his pocket remained hollow, a silent, metallic taunt. Had he been abandoned? Discovered? Was the entire apparatus that had given meaning to his treason now just a ghost story? He moved through his work on autopilot, his mind a prisoner of its own secrets. He calculated blast yields and neutron cross-sections, each number feeling like a brick in a wall separating him from the rest of humanity. The camaraderie of shared purpose that permeated the labs was a banquet from which he was forever excluded, watching through a pane of glass. His only tether to something resembling normalcy was Anna. She was a mathematician from Berkeley, assigned to the computational division, her mind a swift, graceful instrument for solving hydrodynamic equations for the implosion. They met in the library, a fortress of silence amidst the chaos, both seeking refuge from the noise. She had a quiet intensity, a sadness in her eyes that mirrored his own, though its source was different. She spoke of the beauty of pure mathematics, corrupted by the exigencies of war, of the haunting feeling that they were all writing a new demonic chapter in the book of physics. With her, he could drop the pretense of patriotic zeal. They shared a language of moral disquiet, a profound sorrow for the world they were helping to unmoor. In her presence, the monstrous weight on his soul felt momentarily shared, diluted. He began to see in her not just an ally, but a possible future, a life after the Mesa, a redemption he knew he could never truly earn. And then, the thaw. The signal came not through the pen, but through an act of mundane sabotage. The water heater in his shared cabin failed, flooding the small bathroom. While the military housing officer grumbled about shoddy plumbing, Leo found it. A small wax-sealed aluminum tube, shoved deep into the inlet pipe, placed there by a hand he would never know. Inside, a microdot. The instructions were concise, brutal, and of monumental significance. Moscow's physicists, analyzing his earlier data, had hit a wall. The implosion design was elegant, but the symmetry of the explosive shockwave was a theoretical phantom. They needed the exact specifications of the high explosive lenses, the intricate multi-shaped charges that would wrap the plutonium core and crush it with perfect uniformity. The American solution to this problem had a code name: chrysanthemum. This was the heart of the plutonium bomb. Without it, the Soviet device was a blind, stumbling giant. The order was a quantum leap in risk. This was not mapping guard posts. This was stealing the finished, engineered blueprint of the bomb's most complex non-nuclear component. The data was held in a vault within the X Division, a zone of even higher security, accessible only to a handful of senior engineers and their trusted assistants. Leo was not one of them. He spent 3 days in a state of near paralysis, the microdot burning a hole in his consciousness. He watched Anna across the cafeteria, her laugh at some joke a painful reminder of the innocence he was about to incinerate. The balance of terror he believed in now demanded a personal terror so profound it threatened to unmake him. His opportunity came from chaos. A major test of explosive formulations was scheduled at Anchor Ranch, a remote canyon site. For 72 hours, the senior X Division staff would be consumed by the fiery diagnostics. Security would be intense, but focused outward, on the perimeter. The vault, while still guarded, would be accessed less frequently. Leo's plan was not born of spycraft genius, but of desperate observation. He had noted that the vault's second guard, a corporal named O'Malley, suffered from migraines. Leo, known as a harmless brainiac, had once offered him aspirin from his own kit. A connection, however faint. On the night of the test, with the distant muffled thump of high explosives echoing through the mountains like a sickened heartbeat, Leo enacted his plan. He reported a malfunction in a calculating machine in an office adjacent to the vault corridor. A plausible, technical emergency. He carried his toolbox. He found O'Malley at his post, pale and sweating, fingers pressed to his temple. The other guard was making a perimeter round. Leo offered sympathy and stronger painkillers from his kit. He lingered, talking in a low, calming voice about the pressure they were all under, sharing a cigarette. It was a performance of human concern that felt like the deepest sin of all. When O'Malley stepped into a nearby lavatory for a moment of relief, Leo was alone at the vault door for 90 seconds. He didn't open it. That was impossible. Instead, he worked on the ventilation grate high on the wall of the corridor, a task he had ostensibly come to fix. From his toolbox, he retrieved a modified periscope device, a simple series of mirrors he had crafted in the metal shop. He slid it silently through the slats of the grate, which offered a narrow sight line into the vault's interior. On a desk inside, left in the rush to the test site, was a folder. Stamped on its cover was the designation X2, Lens Assembly, Chrysanthemum, Final. His hands, steady as a surgeon's, manipulated the device. A tiny camera, adapted from a child's toy, was affixed to the eyepiece. He pressed the shutter release. A soft, almost inaudible click. He took 3 photographs, shifting the angle slightly each time. Then the apparatus was retracted. The grate silently resecured. He was back at his toolbox when O'Malley returned, looking marginally better. Leo gave him a weary smile, a shared look of men enduring the same strange hell. and left. The film cartridge in his pocket felt like a live coal. He made the drop that same night, in the dead of winter, the microfilm capsule hidden inside a frozen carcass of a rabbit left by the fence line. A morbid signal Elizabeth would recognize. He returned to his cabin, his body shaking not from the cold, but from a systemic shock. He had done it. He had stolen the soul of the weapon. That night, he dreamed not of discovery or prison, but of the chrysanthemum. In the dream, it was not an explosive lens, but a beautiful, intricate flower made of frozen light. He reached for it, and as his fingers touched the petals, they dissolved into a silent, expanding fire that consumed the sky. He woke with a gasp, Anna's name on his lips, a confession, and a plea choked back into the suffocating darkness. The deed was done. The balance was being forged. And Leo Stern, standing at the center of the maelstrom, had never felt more profoundly, irredeemably alone. The weight of the chrysanthemum was now his to carry, forever. The summer of 1945 arrived on the Mesa not as a season, but as a final breathless countdown. A terrible focused energy replaced the earlier anxiety. The gadget was no longer a collection of theories and blueprints. It was a physical, plutonium-laden artifact, assembled with monastic care in a specially constructed ranch house in the heart of the Jornada del Muerto desert. They called the test site Trinity. The name chosen by Oppenheimer hung in the air with a weight of religious finality. For Leo, it felt less like a holy site and more like a sacrificial altar, and he was among the priests condemned to consecrate it. The final weeks were a blur of logistical frenzy and profound, silent introspection. Leo's group worked around the clock, finalizing the predicted yield calculations, their numbers now attached to an actual assembled sphere of metal and explosives. The moral vertigo was now a constant companion, a silent scream behind every conversation. He saw it in the eyes of others too, in the deepened lines on Fermi's face, in Oppie's skeletal frailty, in the way men would suddenly fall silent mid-sentence, staring at nothing. They were all stepping across a threshold from which there was no return, and they knew it. Anna was his only anchor. In the quiet hours, they would walk to the edge of the mesa, away from the barbed wire and the guard towers, and look out at the vast, starlit desert. They spoke of the future in fragile, hopeful terms, of universities, of pure research, of a world where science healed instead of unmade. She spoke of her dream to study stellar nucleosynthesis, the birth of elements in stars. It was a beautiful, innocent dream, and Leo clung to it as a lifeline, even as he felt the lie of his own existence poisoning the space between them. He loved her with a desperate, hopeless intensity, because in her eyes he saw the man he could have been, the man he had irrevocably sacrificed. Then came the summons. In the pre-dawn darkness of July 16th, a convoy of military vehicles carried a select group of scientists to the observation base camp, 20 miles from Ground Zero. The atmosphere was surreal, a macabre camping trip. They were given crude welder's goggles and instructions to lie face down on the sand, feet towards the blast. Coffee boiled on camp stoves, the smell mingling with the dry scent of creosote bush. There were nervous jokes, bursts of strained laughter that died as quickly as they started. Leo stood apart, Anna beside him, her hand finding his. Her fingers were ice cold. A voice over the loudspeaker counted down from 10. The final seconds stretched into a lifetime. Leo's mind was a perfect, terrifying blank. He was not thinking of balance, or Stalin, or the Soviet project. He was thinking of the frozen rabbit by the fence line, of the click of his makeshift camera, of the chrysanthemum blooming in the dark vault. He had set this in motion as much as any man here. 0. The universe fractured. First, there was only light. An impossible, voracious light that consumed the darkness, bleaching the landscape into a stark, monochrome negative. It filled the world, pressing against his closed eyelids, even through the thick goggles, a sun born at midnight. Then came the heat, a wave of it rolling across the desert, pressing against his skin like the breath of a forge. And finally, the sound, a brutal, rippling thunder that seemed to tear the fabric of the sky, followed by a prolonged, grinding roar that shook the earth beneath him. He raised his head, disobeying orders. Through the goggles he saw the fireball, a roiling, churning sphere of incandescent fury, rising, transforming a new, malevolent star, pulling desert sand and vaporized steel into its heart. It climbed, painting the clouds above with lurid, hellish colors. The mushroom stem began to form, a column of chaos connecting earth to the blossoming, cancerous cap. It was beauty of the most absolute and terrible kind. It was the death of one world and the violent birth of another. Next to him, he heard a strangled gasp. He turned. Anna had also risen to her knees. The goggles were pushed up on her forehead. Her face, illuminated by the demonic glow, was wet with tears, her eyes wide with a horror so profound it was beyond fear. She was not looking at the spectacle. She was looking through it, into the abyss of its meaning. Oppenheimer's later words would echo, but in that moment, Anna's silent, shattered expression said it all. This was not a weapon. It was a revelation of a new, terminal power. She turned her gaze from the fireball to Leo, as if seeking an answer, a shared understanding of the cataclysm they had wrought. In her eyes, Leo did not see the partner he loved. He saw a witness, and he knew, with a certainty that was colder than the desert night, that he could never tell her the truth. The sublime shared horror of this moment was the one pure thing between them, and his secret was a corruption that would poison it forever. His act to prevent a monopoly of terror had just made him a co-author of the terror itself, and he stood eternally separated from her by the very fire he had helped ignite. The aftermath was a silent, staggered return. In the trucks, men were quiet, shell-shocked. Some vomited by the side of the road. Back on the mesa, a grim, exhausted celebration tentatively began. A sense of technical triumph mixed with the lingering smell of ozone and dread. Leo did not join. He went to his office, a small, windowless cube. His hands were steady as he took out a fresh sheet of paper. He wrote not in code, but in clear, precise, technical English. He documented everything: the observed yield, the characteristics of the blast wave, the specific luminosity, the behavior of the fireball, all the empirical data that would confirm to Moscow that this was not a test, but a success, that the American design worked, that the chrysanthemum had bloomed. This was his final transmission. Not out of ideology, but out of a shattered, perverse completion of his original, broken logic. The monopoly had been demonstrated. The balance must now be created, no matter the cost. He was no longer preventing a future horror. He was feeding an ongoing one to prevent a worse alternative. The moral calculus was now a howling void. He made the package, the film rolled tightly in a metal capsule. He would not signal Elizabeth. It was too dangerous. He would use an emergency, one-time drop, known only to him and the architect. a fissure in a specific rock face 10 miles from the site, used only for the most critical final act. He drove out that evening, the desert still holding the strange, charged scent of the dawn. As he placed the capsule deep into the cold, dark stone, he felt nothing. No pride, no fear, no remorse. He was an empty vessel. The deed was done. The sun had risen in the west, and he had just ensured its reflection would soon answer from the east. He got back in the jeep and looked towards the mesa, where the lights of the laboratory glowed. Somewhere there, Anna was trying to process the unprocessable. He started the engine and drove back towards the only home he had left, a home that now felt more alien than the radioactive sands of Trinity. He had crossed his own personal Rubicon, and the waters behind him were burning. The end of the war did not bring peace. It brought a different kind of silence, a cold, heavy silence that seeped into the foundations of the world. For Leo Stern, the atomic sun that dawned over Hiroshima and Nagasaki was a confirmation of a completed transaction. He had delivered the means. His government had demonstrated the end. The balance he sought was now a geopolitical fact, but it brought him no solace, only a deeper, more profound isolation. Released from the oppressive fellowship of Los Alamos, he and Anna sought to build a new life in the ivy-covered sanctuary of a small New England college. He took a position teaching advanced physics. She pursued her doctorate in astronomy. They rented a house with a view of woods that turned fiery red in the autumn. It was a portrait of a perfect, post-war American life, a deliberate and fragile construction, a life built on a fault line. The machinery that had consumed him did not vanish. It retreated, mutated. The architect, Vladimir, was recalled to Moscow in a flurry of panic after the defection of a cipher clerk in Canada sent shockwaves through Soviet intelligence abroad. His replacement was a colder, more distant entity, communicating only through terse, infrequent messages that held no trace of shared purpose, only demands for status updates. The elegant network of the war years was fracturing under the new, paranoid ice age of the Cold War. Leo was now a sleeper asset, a dormant volcano of secrets, with no one left to receive its eruption. The pen remained hollow, a relic of a closed chapter. But the past was not a book that could be shelved. It was a ghost with a filing cabinet. In Washington, Meredith Cole and the Venona team, armed with more broken ciphers and the terrifying context of the successful Soviet atomic test in 1949, were connecting spectral dots with relentless precision. The codename Mladenets appeared again, linked to technical traffic that could only originate from within the very heart of the Manhattan Project. The pool of suspects narrowed from thousands to hundreds, then to a handful of young physicists with access to the innermost secrets of the implosion design. Leo's name, once buried in a sea of brilliant minds, now floated to the top of a very short, very dangerous list. The pressure was applied not with a battering ram, but with a scalpel. It began with the revocation of his security clearance for the minor, periodic consulting work he did for the Atomic Energy Commission. The letter was polite, citing administrative realignment. Then came the visits from former colleagues, now working for government agencies, who would drop by the campus. Conversations over coffee would subtly probe his views on Klaus Fuchs, on the Rosenbergs, on whether scientists had a higher loyalty. The questions were velvet-wrapped knives. Anna noticed the strain, the way he would tense at the sound of a car door shutting outside, the long nights he spent staring at the dark woods from their bedroom window. She attributed it to the lingering trauma of Trinity, to the guilt they all shared. She would hold him, and her touch was both a balm and a brand. The true crack in his carefully reconstructed world appeared in the form of a man named Philip Crawley. Crawley presented himself as a historian from a prestigious foundation, writing a book on the wartime scientific diaspora. He was charming, erudite, and he knew far too much. He didn't ask about politics. He asked about specific technical problems, the freezing point of the explosive baritol, the tolerances in the spherical high-explosive casting, a cryptic note about lens asymmetry issues in early 45. Each question was a key slid into a lock deep inside Leo's mind. Crawley's eyes, friendly and keen, missed nothing. He was not a historian. He was an investigator, and he was presenting Leo with a gallery of his own ghosts, inviting him to identify them. After Crawley's second visit, Leo knew the game was entering its final moves. He performed a final thorough purge of his study, burning even the most innocuous notes from his Los Alamos days in the fireplace. He told Anna they might need to take a trip, perhaps to Europe, a sudden idea he framed as a romantic adventure. The fear in her eyes then was not about politics, but about him. She saw a man unraveling, and she didn't know why. The crisis point came from the periphery. A message, the first in over a year, arrived via the only remaining agonizingly slow channel. A classified ad in the New York Review of Books, a phrase about Swiss watches for sale that signaled an emergency contact procedure. It led him to a dead drop in a Boston public garden, a loose brick in a wall. The message inside was not from Moscow. It was a warning, likely from the last loyal fragment of the old network, perhaps even from the cleaner. It contained only 3 words, clipped from newspaper headlines. Courier broken, flee. The antique dealer from Santa Fe, arrested years before, had finally talked. The chain of evidence, once a theoretical possibility, was now being forged link by damning link. They had a name, a face, a route. It was only a matter of time, days, perhaps hours, before that chain led to Elizabeth, and from her, directly to the physicist codenamed Mlodnitz. Leo stood in the gathering twilight of the garden, the slip of paper turning to pulp in his sweating hand. Flee. It was the logical, the trained response. Disappear. Use the escape route. The architect had outlined years ago a path through Mexico to a freighter bound for Gdansk. But to do that meant abandoning Anna to the storm. She would be interrogated, her life dismantled, her career destroyed by association. She would look at the hollow shell of the man she loved and see only a stranger and a lie. His flight would be a confession that would condemn her to a lifetime of suspicion and disgrace. He walked back to their house, each step heavier than the last. The woods were dark, the windows of their home glowing with warm, yellow light. He could see her silhouette moving in the kitchen, preparing dinner. This was the life he had wanted, the innocent world he had sought to protect through his crimes. To protect it now, he realized with a crushing, ironic finality, he could not run. He had to stay. He had to face the music, to contain the fallout within himself. He had to trust in the opacity of his deeds, in the lack of courtroom evidence, and in the Cold War calculus that might make a public trial of a key Manhattan Project scientist too messy, too damaging. He entered the house. The smell of rosemary and roasting chicken filled the air. Anna turned, her face softening into a smile that nearly broke him. He went to her, wrapped his arms around her, holding her tighter than he ever had. memorizing the feel of her, the scent of her hair. She asked him what was wrong. He looked into her eyes, the eyes that had seen the birth of the atomic age with him, and he made his choice. "Nothing, my love," he said, his voice remarkably steady. "Just a long day. Everything is fine." It was the last and greatest lie he would ever tell her. He had chosen his cage. The unwinding was over. All that remained was the wait for the knock on the door, for the men in coats who would come to take him from this warmth into the permanent cold. He had sacrificed his future to create a balance of power, and now he would sacrifice his freedom to preserve a single, fragile pocket of peace. The long silence of his secret war was about to end, not with a defection or a dramatic escape, but with a quiet, domestic dinner, and the terrifying sound of his own heartbeat, counting down the final minutes of a life that was already over. The knock did not come at night, shrouded in cinematic storm and shadow. It arrived on a crisp, bright Tuesday morning in October, with the sun filtering through the brilliant red and gold leaves of the New England maple trees. It was a polite, firm sound that echoed through the quiet house with the finality of a vault door closing. Leo was in his study, grading undergraduate papers on quantum mechanics. He had been waiting for this sound for so long that when it finally came, it felt less like a shock and more like a long-delayed verdict being pronounced. He set his pen down, perfectly aligned with the edge of the desk. He looked at the photograph on his desk, a picture of Anna, smiling against the backdrop of the mesa, taken before they knew what Trinity would mean. He committed it to memory, a final snapshot of a stolen life. He answered the door himself before Anna could. Two men stood on the porch. They were not the brutish enforcers of popular imagination. One was older, with the weary eyes of a lifelong bureaucrat. His name was Agent Harris. The younger one, Agent Fields, had the clean-cut, intense look of a believer. They showed their badges with a somber, almost apologetic efficiency. They asked if they could come in. Their voices were calm, devoid of accusation, which made the moment all the more terrifying. Anna appeared in the hallway behind him, her face a mask of confusion that rapidly morphed into dawning, ice-water horror, as Harris stated their business. They had questions regarding Dr. Stern's associations during and after the war. They had a car outside. They would prefer he accompany them to the Boston field office voluntarily. It was not an arrest, they emphasized. It was an interview. Leo nodded, his own calm mirroring theirs, a final performance of normalcy. He told Anna not to worry, that it was a routine matter, a misunderstanding he would clear up. The lie was thin and transparent, and the devastation in her eyes told him she saw through it. As he put on his coat, she grabbed his arm, her grip fierce, her eyes searching his for an answer he could not give. He gently pried her hand loose, gave her a smile that felt like a death rictus, and followed the agents out into the beautiful, indifferent autumn day. The interrogation room was a gray, soundproofed cube. It smelled of stale coffee, cigarette smoke, and dread. For hours, it was a dance of implication and evasion. They did not mention microfilm or dead drops. They spoke of friendships, of political affiliations from his college days, of his correspondence. They showed him photographs, blurred images of the antique dealer from Santa Fe, a grainy shot of Elizabeth entering a building in New York, a picture of Vladimir taken from a distance. Leo's responses were rehearsed, minimalist truths wrapped in layers of omission. He acknowledged knowing colleagues, denied any deep political involvement, feigned vague recognition of faces. The agents were patient, circling. They presented him with the Venona decrypts, the lines of numbers with his code name, Mladenets, circled in red. They watched him read them, studying the microscopic tremors in his hands, the dilation of his pupils. He denied any knowledge, his voice a dry whisper. It was his science against theirs, the science of human stress analysis. The breakthrough, when it came, was not from him. Agent Harris slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It was the sworn statement of the broken courier, detailing the description of the man he knew only as the physicist's contact, a precise description of Elizabeth, and attached a declassified memo from Los Alamos Security, noting a pattern of unauthorized after-hours access to a corridor near the X Division vault in the days preceding the Trinity test, with access logs showing Leo's name for a maintenance call. The two facts sat on the table, a circumstantial bridge across the abyss of proof. Harris leaned back. He did not threaten the electric chair. He did not mention the Rosenbergs. Instead, he spoke of consequences. A public trial would tear the country apart, he said. It would shatter the myth of the Manhattan Project's loyalty, expose gaping security failures, and hand the Soviets a propaganda victory of incalculable value. It would destroy Anna's life utterly and completely. Or Leo could cooperate. A quiet resignation from his academic post. A full confidential debriefing, naming every contact, every method, every piece of information passed. In exchange, no prosecution, no public scandal. He would walk out of this room into obscurity, and Anna would be spared. Leo sat in the silence that followed, a silence filled with the ghosts of his actions. He saw the chrysanthemum blooming in the desert night. He saw the bloodless faces of the Kremlin physicists studying his stolen diagrams. He saw Anna's trusting smile. The balance he had sought to create had finally come down to this: a balance of silence. To protect the fragile peace of the world, his crime had to remain in the shadows. To protect the one person he loved, his punishment would be the same. He looked up at the two agents, at the gray walls of the room that would become the unmarked tomb of his old self. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. The epilogue was not one scene, but a series of them, stark and silent. Leo signing a stack of confessions in a bland government office, his hand steady, his soul elsewhere. A formal letter of resignation from the college, citing health reasons. A for sale sign going up in front of the house with the view of the woods. Anna's face, pale and drawn, staring out the window of a train heading west, away from the ruin of her life, alone. She never looked back. In a secure vault in Moscow, a file stamped "Resolved" is placed on a shelf. Inside, a final report. Asset Mladenets neutralized by compromise. Information stream invaluable. Strategic equilibrium achieved. Years later. A modest apartment in a nondescript Midwestern city. Leo Stern, now going by a different name, works as a technical editor for a textbook publisher. He is an older man, his hair gray, his movements precise and quiet. One evening he sits in a threadbare armchair. On the television, grainy black and white footage shows a Soviet hydrogen bomb test, a fireball dwarfing the one he witnessed at Trinity. The newscaster speaks of the balance of terror, of mutually assured destruction. The camera cuts to a press conference with a strident American general, promising overwhelming retaliation. Leo does not react. He simply watches. He then turns his gaze to the window, where the first snow of winter is beginning to fall, blanketing the mundane world in a layer of silent, pure white. On the shelf beside him, next to a row of physics journals, sits a single small photograph of the Jornada del Muerto desert, empty and vast under a pre-dawn sky. There is no pride in his eyes, no regret, only a profound, immeasurable fatigue, and the quiet, terrible knowledge that the world he helped shape, the balanced, terrified, frozen world, is functioning exactly as designed. He had poured his conscience, his love, and his future into the heart of the machine, and all that remained was the low, constant hum of its perpetual, stable, lifeless operation. The silence was absolute, and it was his creation.